Well, thanks for the kind words. I think the last talk resonated really well with the, like you mentioned, Chandra, just getting started, just getting hands-on, getting that mentorship from the community. But very excited for this talk. I'm going to talk about developer empathy because there were a lot of talks around open source and sustainability. That's a quite popular topic these days. My name is Kunal Kushwaha. I work at Civo and do a bunch of community stuff with CNCF and Cloud Native. And yeah, moving on. Team struggles we have often seen in the ecosystem. For example, some may relate with low team morale if you have a negative work environment, someone who might have different perspectives that can lead to poor communication. That in turn lets the product quality go down, your users start getting upset and frustrated, and it leads to ineffective problem solving because you're not able to communicate well within your team members. And before I move on to empathy for software developers, I like to keep my talks really with action items. So by the end of this talk, we'll have some points to apply as well, because we all know empathy is important. So yeah, but the question, if you can show a raise of hands, if you think is irrelevant to software engineers. Okay, good to know. Believe it or not, there was this one guy, I was in Poland, and there was this one guy, he raised his hand. But it was a different talk, but I still raised that question. Anyway, the answer is no. I'm sure you all agree. The reason is that when we talk about coding, it's about delivering messages to people and machines, and it leads to communication. So ideally, wherever we talk about communication, empathy automatically plays a crucial role. I have made some acronyms for the word empathy for software developers. It's not an official acronym. I just made it up today. So, let's go with that. So the E stands for engagement. So encourage active involvement in open source projects and communities. Now, this is very crucial. And when we talk about users, when we talk about contributors, the art of listening is key. Before we move forward with how do you apply empathy in your day-to-day life, let's talk a bit more about what might push you back and what might prevent empathy within your work culture. And let me know if any one of you can relate to it. I surely will, for myself. So the first bias is confirmational bias. So this is the tendency to seek out some information that already confirms some of your pre-existing beliefs or assumptions, and ignoring the information that contradicts them. For example, developers who suffer from this bias may only seek out user feedback that confirms their assumptions about the product. I have this feature, it's very cool, this is the problem it's solving. I need people who can confirm this, right? I don't need the people outside that circle. So you don't have anyone who is challenging your assumptions. That's confirmation bias. Second one being curse of knowledge. I don't know why I put Voldemort there. I searched curse on Google Images, showed me Voldemort, so I just threw it in there. But assuming others know what we know, I have seen this in open source documentations, like people just write really hardcore documentations that are not, let's say, beginner friendly. And if you want people contributing to your open source projects, make sure you have very nice documentation and a way to communicate within the open source projects community. So folks who suffer from this knowledge may assume that other people may have the same level of knowledge as they do, which can lead to products that are difficult for people to use and understand. The next one, before we move on to that, the second letter, M, stands for mutual support. So fostering a culture of collaboration and mutual assistance within your team and your communities. Hindsight bias, which is a tendency to believe that the events were more predictable after they have occurred. So for example, you may believe that the feedback that you have gotten was obvious, and in retrospect, even if you did not consider it while you were developing the project. So you're making the project, and when the feedback comes, like, oh yeah, we did thought about it, but let's say you didn't. Availability bias, which is the tendency to rely on readily available information when making decisions, rather than seeking out some of the more comprehensive solutions. So for example, you may rely on feedback from a very small group of users and ignoring the feedback that is more difficult to obtain. All right, how do we apply empathy with the users and the community members? P stands for principled decisions. So make ethical and principled choices in development. Obviously, ethics are crucial when we talk about empathy. Creating personas helps. What are personas? These are fictional characters which you can create based upon your research to represent like a specific user type that might use your service, your products, and your brand in a similar way. In addition to that, this is like a little map that I like to follow, which is you identify the individuals and consider the context, and then you define what are the needs of the users. After that, you think about the action. So what is the best action that you can take right now? What is feasible? Because not everything might be possible. You may have to consider budgeting, price, the timeline, and the efforts of the team, the learning curve, so on and so forth, and then creating artifacts. In addition to this, surveys for your community members, user testing, interviews, analytics, focus groups, a lot of options to engage with your users. Right, let's talk a bit more about empathy in the teams, how you can work more effectively. So A stands for accessible technologies. So as a team, you should strive for inclusive and accessible solutions. And at the, when you're organizing like an event or a conference as well, like we do CO Navigate twice a year, so we make sure that we have all the inclusive steps, like I'm sure you have seen as well at State of OpenCon, like the dietary requirements and the accessibility with transport and everything. So as a company, you should always strive for inclusive and accessible solutions and a culture overall. Along with, when we talk about teammates, I think trust is important. Communication, creativity, morale, and efficiency. I think empathy plays a huge role when lifting up all of these characteristics. Strategies. Actively listening to your team members, putting oneself in other people's shoes. This is basically what the definition of empathy is. Practicing curiosity. So, here we go. All right, good. Yeah, practicing curiosity. I was curious right now why it went off. So practicing perspective taking, thinking about what other people's perspective are. I'd say if you're in a more leadership role, then to run a good meeting, for example, listen more and talk less, and be decisive when the time comes. Providing support. So obviously, when we talk about team members working together, you should support each other. Where I work, we have a policy like no question is a bad question. Everyone can ask anything and the other people will support you. T stands for transparency because we're talking about teams. So promote open communication and transparency culture within your company and with your users and customers, open source contributors, everyone as well. This is my favorite part. So oftentimes you may have, if you can just show a raise of hand, if you joined a new company or a new project, and you find some code base which is just the worst thing you've ever seen in your life. And the person who wrote that code has left the company. So you can't, I've been there. So, and now you can't ring them up because they've left the company. They won't reply. You can't email them, you can't get in touch with them, it's not their fault. So what do? So that you can treat this as an archaeological site. What do you call the people who do the dinosaur bone thing? Paleontologist? Archaeologist? Yeah, archaeologists. So archaeological site, and leave the code better than you found it. So when you find like a dinosaur, and obviously it has bits of pieces missing, but what they do is they make, like, if you go to the Natural History Museum, they make molds and they reverse engineer it and they make like a structure. So they found bad code, they made it better, they made it look pretty. So you can work with what you have. Think about what you can do in that scenario, how many resources you have, rather than just feeling bad, like who wrote this bad code. But when we talk about empathy, leave the code better than you found it. This is empathy for future people. the people who would be working on the same project when you have left, so they would thank you. Speaking of which, documentation as well. So don't forget the docs. I think good writing is simple writing. That's a nice little saying. And yeah, document your code as well, so the future teammates will thank you. Last but not least, leaders. And you talk about empathy for leaders to shape the future. There was a very nice keynote in the morning. We're talking about how the future people will work on open source projects and whatever. But the H stands for human-centric design. So prioritize user-centered designs and empathy towards user. I had to put this slide here because of the H, but this actually relates back to when I was talking about the empathy towards your users. This is also very important. The leaders who are empathetic understand imposter syndrome. I don't think there's anything bad about imposter syndrome. Everyone gets it. And if you don't invite it, then you should just figure out the right plan of action, because stuff that is not in your control, I can't say you, I can talk about myself. Stuff that is not in my control, I don't worry about it. But stuff that is in my control, I would worry about it. But imposter syndrome is a good example. Like, no one invites imposter syndrome, it just happens to the best of us. So that's fine, because it's happening to everyone, or most people. And what do you do about it? I think you can look at the bright side and the silver lining. Like, if you don't know something or you put in a new project, then that's a good opportunity to learn something new or contribute. But either way, the key takeaway is we all, like most people feel it, but it's okay, you're not alone, and you can make the most out of that and see what next steps you can take. And write readable code, yeah. And when we talk about leadership, then some of the finest leaders are the ones who remember what it was like when they were starting from the very beginning. Oftentimes it's very easy to forget, but that's a good characteristic of a leader, when they know how they came from the bottom up when they started out and positioned themselves. Last but not least, a youthful innovation. So embrace new ideas and approaches with an enthusiasm. Think outside the box. Always be open to change, because change is inevitable. And just be open to new ideas. I think that sums it up. And that's empathy for software developers. Completely made up, but relevant. Yeah, that's it. I had 15 minutes. That's the best I could come up with. And, oh, sorry, I have a question. There's a question, can empathy be taught? So, yes, raise of hands. And no? Okay. Encouraged. I think it's much more than a feeling, it's a skill. And if it's a skill, then it can be taught. I think a good example for this is there are some, like, I read somewhere, like high schools and universities where they teach like empathy and in their coursework as well. But yeah, I think good way to start is what the steps I just mentioned for the users, for the teammates, and for the leaders. Just actively listen, communicate effectively, and just think of yourself in other people's shoes. It's not a fixed rate that many people are, born with, but you can definitely, learn it. And just time to reflect. Thank you. Time to reflect. Think about a time where lack of empathy may have hindered a project, and how you could have done things differently. And that's something to take away. And this is a nice little quote. Yeah, I'm not going to read that, but you can. And that's it. I think, yeah, if you want to connect with me, it's my email and Twitter or X. And thanks for having me. Very good conference.